As we sat at the counter waiting for our food, he talked and joked, sometimes with us, sometimes with the cook and the waitress. When Joey addressed him as Mister, he told us to call him Lonnie. That's what my niece calls me, he said. I tell her she might show me a little respect and put Uncle in front of my name, but she's nearly 14 and pretty set in her ways. Then he asked Joey about the banjo, if he could play it, and so on. Little by little we told him about Howie, about our plans to find a place where I could play piano and where maybe Joey could accompany me with the banjo when he learned to play better. Lonnie seemed interested. He kept looking at me while we talked as if he were thinking of something. When the waitress came to wipe off the counter in front of us, he said, "Bessie, is that old piano still in the next room?" He jerked his head toward an adjoining room that looked like a makeshift dining room. "Sure," the woman said. "You buying up junk on this trip?" "This kid says he can play. I want to hear him. All right if we go in while the hamburgers are cooking?" "Come on." She motioned for me to follow her and led the way into the next room. "This ain't no Steinway, but you're welcome to try it." And she said, the empty little dining room was cold, and the piano was pretty close to being the junk the waitress had called it. Some 2 months had passed since I had even seen a piano, and this one, junk though it might be, looked good to me. My fingers felt stiff at first, and it took me a little while to get going. It wasn't long, though, until I began to feel at home again, almost as if Howie were beside me and Miss Crown were listening from her office. My confidence began to return, and I played for Lonnie and the waitress, the cook, and 2 or 3 customers with all the skill I could rediscover, with all the spirit left in me. As music it wasn't very much, but they liked it. They had all crowded inside the door and had stood there in the cold listening while I played. They clapped when I was through, and they said that surely there must be a job someplace a kid like me could play like that. Joey was beaming. I could see that he felt our troubles were almost over. While we were eating, the waitress came over and gave Lonnie a slip of paper with a name and address written on it. "Lonnie, this man, Pete Harris, is a cousin of mine," she explained. "He grew up here in Nebraska. We went to school together. He's been down south for 15, maybe 20 years now, but he always keeps in touch. Reason I'm telling you this is that Pete has a carnival down near Baton Rouge. Not much of a carnival, I guess. He's operating on shoestring, he told us, but I know he hires piano players sometimes. He just might have a place for this boy. Will you be anywhere near Baton Rouge on your way down?" "I can make it a point to be there," Lonnie answered. "Pete's a pretty good sort of fellow. He'll go out of his way to help someone down on his luck. I've got reason to know that. He always been a showman, even when he was a kid. He was forever putting on some kind of show. That's been his life, and that's all he'll ever do. He'll never get rich at it, though. He's the sort of guy who looks after the other fellow before himself." "Not many of that breed left," Lonnie said thoughtfully. "You're plenty right there ain't. Now, of course, I don't know Pete's circumstances, but I know that if he has a place or can make one for this boy, he'll do it." She nodded at me. "Tell him Bessie Jenkins recommended you. He'll like doing me a favor." The waitress was not a pretty woman, and her voice was not as pleasant as I liked women's voices to be, but she looked and sounded wonderful to me that snowy evening. I tried to tell her how much I appreciated her interest in me. We slept in the back of the truck that night, wedged in between the big cartons packed there, but well wrapped in the blankets Lonnie carried with him. Cold and hunger had kept me awake many times, but this night it was excitement that kept sleep from me. I stared up in the darkness for hour after hour and tried to think of the future. Nothing was very clear. My goal was vague and undefined. I guess the possibility for survival was all I asked. I thought the other 2 were sound asleep, but after a long time Lonnie's voice came out of the dark from the other side of the truck. He seemed to know that I was awake. "You don't forgive easily, do you, Josh?" I knew he was thinking of Dad. "No, I guess I don't." "Haven't you ever made any mistakes yourself?" "Of course. But you somehow got that idea that men have no right to make mistakes, that it's just a privilege of kids?" I didn't answer. He was quiet for a long time, and I thought he wasn't going to say anything more, which was all right with me. After a while, however, he spoke again. "Everyone makes mistakes. I made one once, and it's nearly driven me out of my mind at times. My boy. I told you he died 5 years ago. Well, he complained of a bad bellyache one night. His mother wanted to call a doctor, but I thought that it was just a case of a kid eating a little too much or getting hold of something that didn't agree with him. I made him take a big dose of castor oil. My mother had given me that remedy many a time, and I'd always gotten better in a few hours, but it wasn't right for Davy. He had appendicitis, and it killed him." It wasn't easy to find words. I tried to tell him I was sorry, but I stumbled miserably. I don't think he was paying much attention to what I said anyway. He kind of muttered the next words to himself. He said, "If I met your dad tonight, I'd shake his hands, and I'd say, 'Brother, I know just how you feel.' I could hear him turn so that he was facing the outside of the truck. Neither of us said anything more.